You were never supposed to hear this. What I'm about to tell you was meant to stay buried in the desert, sealed under dry earth, locked behind Union Pacific files, and forgotten in the sands of early Las Vegas. But someone talked, someone whispered, and now that you're here, there's no going back. In 1902, before Las Vegas was a city, before casinos or neon lights ever touched the horizon, there was a patch of land so cursed it was left off maps. It was 4 miles south of where the railroad would one day run. A dead zone, no vegetation, no wildlife, just dust, heat, and something else. Beneath that soil lay 79 bodies, neatly buried, perfectly spaced, every grave 6 feet apart. No crosses, no names, only numbers, etched into small river stones and left for no one. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a cemetery, and it sure as hell wasn't sanctioned. The man behind it all was Jeremiah Henderson. You've never heard of him, because powerful men made sure you wouldn't. But in the early 1900s, he ran one of the most profitable disappearing operations in the American West. And by disappearing, I don't mean witness protection. I mean dead, erased, bodies vanished, identities recycled, wealth transferred, and it all tied back to one goal: land, prime railfront land that would become the foundation of Las Vegas. You've been lied to about how this city was built. They'll tell you it was founded on opportunity, railroads, and water rights. But it was built on blood. Hidden beneath the official story is a different kind of American dream, the kind where murder is business, family is leverage, and morality is nothing more than a luxury for the weak. The question isn't why Jeremiah did it. That's the easy part: power. The real question, the one that'll keep you up at night, is how many others helped him, and how far they were willing to go to protect the secret. Because once you understand what really happened in that desert, you'll realize something terrifying. Las Vegas didn't rise from the ground. It was fed, body by body, until the land was rich enough to bloom. You're not just watching a story. You're opening a vault that was never supposed to be unlocked. And what's inside isn't done with you yet. They called it Henderson's Harvest. A name whispered in taverns, spoken only once, never twice, and never in daylight. You couldn't find it on a map, but if you were desperate enough, if your past was on your heels and your name no longer safe, word would find you. There's a man in the Nevada desert, they'd say, who can make your life disappear. But what they didn't tell you was what he took in return. Jeremiah Henderson didn't look like a killer. He looked like a broken man. Tall, sunburnt, a former rancher whose hands bore the weight of too many failed winters. But something changed in him the moment he realized the desert didn't need law. It needed efficiency. By the time most men were praying for rain, Jeremiah was plotting the perfect geometry of death. The killings didn't begin as murder. That's what makes this story so dangerous. They began as transactions, mutually beneficial even. Men on the run, men with secrets, men who didn't want to be found. Jeremiah offered them silence, burial, and rebirth for a price. But when that price became more than money, when bodies became currency for land, for legacy, for control, that's when something ancient awoke in the sand. He started with fugitives, men no one would miss. But eventually, the criteria changed. A man with the wrong questions, a traveler who saw too much, a railroad clerk who stumbled on a pattern. By 1904, Jeremiah had developed a system, a quiet intake, a quiet room, a quiet death, and his wife Sarah, she cooked them dinner, she smiled. She tucked in the children, and when the wind howled that night across the valley, she buried another number beneath a moonless sky. And here's what no one wants to admit: Jeremiah wasn't alone. He had help, silent partners, land speculators, even railroad officials. Every piece of property he acquired near the depot was signed, notarized, and paid for in full. But no one asked where the money came from. No one asked where the previous bidder went, because when you benefit from the killing, you become part of it. This wasn't just the story of a man. It was a machine, a system built on silence and incentivized amnesia, and it worked. You still think Las Vegas is a city of chance? No, brother. It's a city of design, and the blueprint was written in bone. The desert has a way of keeping secrets, but only for a while. Bones shift, wind unearths, and sometimes a child sees something he was never meant to see. Samuel Henderson was 12 the first time he followed his father past the fence. He watched from the edge of the scrub brush as Jeremiah knelt by a shallow trench with a shovel in one hand and a satchel in the other. He didn't understand it at the time, But he remembered the way his father's movements changed, methodical, ritualistic, not like a man burying something, but like a man planting. As if he expected something to grow from that grave. That was number 14. By then, Jeremiah had perfected his method. A series of signs marked the surrounding Joshua trees, etched symbols only he understood. Sarah, now fully aware, kept meticulous accounts hidden in a jar beneath the stove. Each entry cold and precise: date, name, amount paid, estimated value of possessions, condition of the body, notes, cooperative, no struggle, resisted, blunt force used, disposal complete, children unaware. But they were not unaware. Mary, 15, once found a bloody cufflink tucked in the folds of a blanket. Rebecca, only 9, heard screams in the night, muffled, buried beneath the desert wind. And Samuel stopped speaking altogether for a time, not out of fear, but something worse, comprehension. He understood. This wasn't just about land. It wasn't about survival anymore. It had become doctrine. Jeremiah spoke in phrases that sounded rehearsed, as if quoting a scripture no one else could read. All things must be converted, he once told Sarah as he cleaned a bloodied pair of boots. Wealth is never destroyed, only transferred. This was no longer about opportunity. It was a philosophy, a justification, a belief system built on the premise that erasure equals salvation. Not just for the fugitives he killed, but for himself, for his family, for the city he was building from bone and deceit. And if you're thinking this sounds insane, pause for a moment, because Jeremiah's land claims were approved, his titles legal, his deeds recorded in the early property ledgers of Clark County. No questions asked, no investigations launched. So now ask yourself, what kind of system allows a man to buy the future with 79 bodies and walk away as a founder? You were never told the truth about this country, because the men who buried it also built it. By early 1905, the Henderson Homestead had become more than a desert stop. It was a filtration system for human souls. Men entered, some broke bread, some paid gold, all were given one final sunset, and by morning they were gone, not to California, not to Texas, but to that perfectly gridded orchard of the dead, each 6 feet down, spaced precisely apart, like rows in a harvest field waiting for the devil's reaping. They called it the numbering. Not aloud, but between themselves. Jeremiah would mark a stone after every burial and place it carefully along a predetermined path winding through the rear of the property. The first 20 were tight, close to the creek bed. The next 20 spread out wider as the family grew bolder. By the time he passed number 40, there was no more hesitation, no more debate, just process. Sarah baked bread for the condemned. Mary washed their clothes. Samuel dug holes when his father's back ached. Rebecca held a doll sewn from the sleeve of a dead man's jacket and never understood why it made the adults cry when she brought it to the table. This wasn't murder anymore. It was maintenance. And Jeremiah, he believed he was building something sacred, a new kind of temple, not with stone or scripture, but with sacrifice. His journal from this period reveals a shift, not in tactics, but in tone. The language becomes religious, messianic. They are offering themselves unknowingly, he wrote. Each man taken makes space for something greater. Each grave a deposit in the foundation of power. Power, that was always the word. Not wealth, not comfort, not even legacy. Power, the kind that bends cities, the kind that turns nothing into empire. And for Jeremiah, the only way to earn that kind of dominion was to pay in flesh, an ancient economy, as old as conquest itself. Las Vegas wasn't born in 1905. That's just when the papers said it began. The real Las Vegas, the one built in shadows, was already breathing by then. Because every time a man disappeared at that homestead, every time a stone was marked and a body put in the ground, the soil became more valuable. And the system, our system, rewarded that. You still think this is about one family? No. This is about what happens when the land itself starts to crave blood. The greatest lie ever sold is that evil always looks like chaos, wild, uncontrolled. But the truth, evil is tidy, efficient, boring even. It files paperwork, it logs details, it smiles over supper while calculating the next removal. And by mid-1905, Jeremiah Henderson had become a master of evil's true form, administration. He didn't need to hide anymore. The operation was cloaked not in shadows, but in respectability. He was now Mr. Henderson, a man with land influence and a future in Las Vegas politics. He shook hands with surveyors, toasted deals with railmen, and sat on 3 local committees formed to guide the moral development of the town's outskirts. But just beneath the polished exterior, the machine continued to grind. By now, Jeremiah had acquired 2 parcels directly adjacent to the San Pedro rail corridor, land that had tripled in value in under 6 months. He claimed the purchases came from inheritance. No one asked to see the will. No one cared, because Las Vegas was not a city looking for truth. It was a city looking for momentum, and momentum, Jeremiah understood, was the most powerful currency in America. As 1905 drew to a close, his journal entries took a darker turn. He began referring to the burial site not as the field, but as the ledger. He described each body not by name but by value. One entry reads, save for 47.70 total cash, boots, mule, revolver, no traceable kin, excellent yield. Another, Fay 51 sing weak constitution. Decomposing quickly, mournful made the sign of the cross before expiration. Regretfully inefficient. What kind of man evaluates souls like inventory? A man who believes the world owes him everything he was denied. And make no mistake, Jeremiah believed he had been denied everything. He wrote of Salt Lake's elites with scorn, of the rail tycoons who bought land he couldn't afford in May, of the bankers who laughed at his handshake. But now they were shaking his hand, because his land held promise, and no one dared ask how he came to own it. This is the heart of the lie. We think monsters hide in the woods, but they walk among us, in tailored suits, sitting at land auctions, smiling with perfect teeth. Las Vegas was a frontier town in name only. In truth, it was the proving ground for a system we still live under. A system where the morally bankrupt rise fastest, because they're not slowed down by conscience. In the spring of 1906, something shifted. Not in the killing, it had already become routine, but in the response of the land itself. Sarah Henderson was the first to notice. The burial field had changed. The soil, once dry and cracked, had begun to soften, darken, breathe. Grass sprouted in patches that shouldn't have grown. The wind moved strangely, circling the homestead at night like a warning that arrived too late. She said nothing to Jeremiah. Not anymore. He had stopped listening months ago. To her, to God, even to his own children. His ears were attuned only to one frequency now: opportunity. And if the land was changing, he saw it not as an omen, but as validation. In one of his final unsent letters, Jeremiah wrote, "The ground accepts them now. It drinks them faster. It wants them? Let that sink in." This wasn't superstition. It was observation. A man so far gone he saw death not as an act, but as an offering. The murders were no longer practical. They were sacramental. And in his mind, the land had become a partner. A silent co-conspirator that fed him reward in exchange for flesh. But not everyone was blind to the rot. Samuel, just 13, had found the ledger. Not the one hidden beneath the stove, the other one, the true record, buried beneath a row of floorboards in the cabin's eastern wall. It was filled with diagrams, field layouts, burial schedules, notations like "I've just spacing to 6.5 for summer heat," and "Test shallow grave the 62, observe wildlife interference." It wasn't a diary. It was a manual. A how-to guide for converting human life into real estate. And it broke the boy. That night, he didn't sleep. He stood in the hallway for hours, staring at the door to his parents' room, trying to summon the courage to do something, anything. Tell someone, run, confront. But instead, he did what every broken child in a cursed family learns to do: first survive. He returned the book exactly as he found it, not because he forgave his father, but because he understood him. Samuel saw it now. Jeremiah wasn't trying to escape poverty. He was trying to buy divinity, not with faith blood, one grave at a time, and the price was almost paid. By the summer of 1906, the number was 63. 63 graves, 63 vanished men, 63 pieces of land paid for in bone. But here's the part no one expected. Jeremiah started losing control. Not of the operation. That was more efficient than ever. No, what slipped was something far more dangerous: his mask. He no longer bothered with niceties. Clients were processed like livestock. No last words, no farewell letters, just silence, disposal, documentation. Mary, now 16, stopped asking questions. She could see what her father had become. Not a provider, not even a man, an instrument of something older and colder than logic. He barely ate, barely spoke. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, as if he was waiting for something, someone, to arrive. And then he started digging graves before the victims came. He said it saved time. Sarah knew better. He had begun to need it. The act, the control, the burial. It was no longer business. It was ritual. One day, Samuel saw his father kneeling over an empty hole. whispering prayers in a language he didn't recognize. And when he asked him what he was saying, Jeremiah didn't look up. He just smiled and said, "I'm thanking the land." The transformation was almost complete. But the land, it began to answer back. That same summer, a group of prospectors passed through the area. They stayed at the Henderson station overnight, then vanished the next morning. Their horses were found days later, tied to a dried-up creek bed, untouched. Locals whispered. Suspicion sparked. A name was spoken in connection: Jeremiah. It didn't matter how well he'd hidden the graves. Something had shifted in the air. The townspeople didn't know, not exactly, but they felt, and in frontier towns, feeling is enough. That's when Sarah made her move. She began writing letters. Not to lawmen, they couldn't be trusted. Not to journalists, they could be bought. She wrote to a priest, an old friend from Salt Lake, not because she believed Jeremiah could be saved, but because she feared something worse, that he had succeeded, that the land he bought was now consecrated by death, that Las Vegas itself was being seeded with blood. Prepared for something only he understood, she ended the letter with a single line: "There are 63 graves, and he says the ground is still hungry." And she was right. The desert doesn't forget. It just waits. Autumn came late in 1906. The air turned colder, but the soil stayed warm, too warm. Sarah noticed it first when her shovel struck something soft while she dug behind the cabin. Not bone, not stone. Something else. Something breathing. She dropped the spade and didn't speak of it again. But that night, she doubled the bolts on the children's bedroom door. Because the dead weren't resting. Jeremiah had stopped sleeping entirely. He would pace the homestead at night, murmuring to himself, clutching his journal like scripture. He claimed he heard voices, whispers from beneath the graves. He said they spoke in patterns, in numbers. "The land is marking time," he told Sarah. "It's almost ready." Ready for what? Even he didn't know. He had begun visiting the graves at night, not to mourn, not to hide, but to count, one by one, touching each stone like a priest administering last rites. And each time he returned, his hands were covered in something he claimed was clay. But Sarah knew better. There was nothing soft in that soil, nothing that should ooze or pulse. Mary saw it too. She told Samuel she dreamed of men standing outside their windows at night, face covered in dirt, eyes hollow, lips moving silently. When she woke, her shoes were filled with sand. Rebecca began humming strange tunes in her sleep, songs no one had taught her. When Sarah asked her where she heard them, she only pointed to the field and said, "The men sing them when they lie down." This was no longer just a murder spree. It was a haunting, not by ghosts, but by intention, the kind of darkness that doesn't come from hell, it precedes it. And Jeremiah, he embraced it fully. He told Sarah the number was sacred, 79, no more, no less, not 78, not 80. He said he didn't pick it, the land did. And he swore that once the final grave was dug, something would happen. Something permanent. Something unholy. He called it the exchange, a moment where the debt would be paid, and the land would give back. But give back what? Sarah didn't ask. She already knew. Whatever was coming, whatever Jeremiah had summoned, it wouldn't stop at the edge of their property. It would spread. Because this wasn't just a man's madness anymore. This was a system awakening, and the 64th grave was already waiting. What happens when a system built on silence begins to whisper back? By late November 1906, the wind in the Nevada Valley had changed. It no longer howled, it hummed. Rhythmic, like a chant buried in static. The travelers noticed first. Drifters, gamblers, and railroad men who passed near the Henderson homestead claimed they heard voices at dusk. Not screams, chants. Layered voices repeating numbers over and over again. Counting up, never down, 67, 68, 69. They thought it was the wind. They were wrong. Jeremiah didn't hide from it. He stood outside the house most nights, shirtless, eyes closed, muttering back at the wind like he was listening to a sermon no one else could hear. When Sarah begged him to come inside, he replied only once, and what he said would haunt her until the day she died. "You don't bury men to hide them. You bury them to root something." It was more than murder now. It was agriculture. A perverse cultivation of souls meant to grow something deep beneath the dirt. And whatever that thing was, it was waking up. By this point, Samuel had stopped sleeping entirely. The boy walked with the gait of a man twice his age, eyes sunken, hands trembling. He knew the number. Everyone in the house did. 79. That was the goal, the finish line, the opening. But on the night after the 69th burial, Samuel saw something that tore the veil completely. He followed his father into the field. From the brush, he watched Jeremiah light a lantern and walk from grave to grave, stopping at each, bending low, whispering. But this time the ground whispered back. It moved. Not like an animal, not like a sinkhole, like breath. The boy's scream never left his throat. He ran, not to his mother, not to town, but to the old barn where he scribbled down everything he saw. Pages of drawings, symbols, and a map of the graveyard, the real one, with notes that didn't make sense to anyone but him. Because he'd realized something chilling, the graves weren't random. They weren't just a grid. They formed a sigil, an ancient shape. And Jeremiah wasn't building a homestead, he was building a gate. The map Samuel drew was crude, frantic, lines scrawled in charcoal, corners torn from old feed sacks, but what it revealed was undeniable. Each grave was a point, each point a mark. Together they formed something ancient, something designed. A circular structure with spirals at the edges and sharp intersections at exact geometrical angles. It wasn't superstition, it was architecture. And at the center of it all, where the 79th grave would be, stood the house. The Henderson home wasn't just a shelter. It was the keyhole. The graves, the geometry, the blood, all leading inward. All pointing to that cabin like spokes in a cursed wheel. Sarah found Samuel's drawings hidden in the barn rafters. She studied them for hours, trembling, recognizing something buried deep in her own memory. Symbols she had once seen in a forbidden Mormon text locked away by her father when she was just a girl. Not Christian symbols. Not even demonic. Pre-flood, pre-language. Sarah didn't believe in evil as an idea anymore. She believed in it as a force, a current, something older than scripture, deeper than history, passed down not through words but ritual. And she finally understood. Jeremiah hadn't invented this system. He had discovered it. It had always been here, waiting. All he'd done was feed it, and now it was almost fed. The 70th victim came on a Thursday, a preacher named Elijah Graham, fleeing embezzlement charges in Colorado. He arrived at the homestead asking for water, but Sarah saw the way Jeremiah looked at him, not as a man, but as an offering. She tried to stop it. She begged, pleaded. Jeremiah said nothing. That night, she woke to the smell of fire. Elijah's belongings burned, his name scratched off the ledger, his voice gone forever, but his crucifix remained. Samuel found it in the field the next morning, buried in the sand with fresh blood still crusted on the chain. And that was the moment Sarah made her decision, not to run, not to confess, but to intervene, because she realized the 79th body didn't have to be a stranger, it just had to be a sacrifice. And if she couldn't stop the gate from opening, she could decide who paid the final price. In early December 1906, the temperature dropped, but the house felt hotter than ever. Not from fire, from pressure, from something beneath the floorboards that seemed to radiate upwards, a heat that wasn't physical, but spiritual. Sarah began sleeping in short bursts, clutching a butcher's knife beneath her pillow. Samuel boarded the windows at night without being asked. Mary refused to go outside. Even the birds had stopped flying overhead. Inside the Henderson house, a silent war began. Sarah moved like a ghost, preparing meals, tending to Rebecca, pretending to believe Jeremiah's lies. But her mind was fixed on one truth. The countdown was nearing its end. 71, 72, 73. Each death brought the house closer to something she could feel but not name. And each time she looked at Jeremiah, she saw less of a husband and more of a vessel. His eyes no longer registered the present. He muttered to himself in languages he had never studied. And at night, she'd wake to find him kneeling in the living room, eyes wide, mouth moving silently, like he was receiving instruction. She kept her knife closer, but she needed more than a blade. She needed time. So Sarah made a choice no mother should ever have to make. She sent Mary and Rebecca away, told them they were going to stay with her cousin in Pahrump, claimed it was temporary. Mary didn't believe her, but didn't argue. She could see the truth in her mother's eyes, that this wasn't a visit, it was a salvation. As they left, Mary looked back only once. Samuel stood on the porch watching with hollow eyes. He didn't wave, because he knew what was coming. By that week's end, the number was 76. Only 3 left. The gate was nearly complete, and Jeremiah, he could feel it. He started laughing again, whistling, touching Sarah's shoulders when she passed him in the kitchen, calling her, "My good luck." But she didn't speak, because she wasn't listening to him anymore. She was listening to the house, and she had made her plan. If the final stone had to fall, if the 79th body was the price to keep the gate from opening, then she'd pay it herself. But not before making sure that Jeremiah Henderson would be the 80th. Because evil doesn't end at 79. It only pauses until someone makes it pay interest. Seeds crack, bones shift, and in December of 1906, just outside the growing city of Las Vegas, the Henderson land wasn't sleeping. It was waiting. The 77th victim arrived under fog, a railroad man named Carter Hale. Samuel watched him walk up the path, boots thick with red clay, eyes weary from too many nights on the run. He shook Jeremiah's hand, sat by the stove, ate stew, laughed once, and was gone by morning. 77. The number echoed in the house like a ticking bomb. 2 left, 2 breaths before the ritual reached completion. But something had changed, something Jeremiah refused to speak about. The field was fighting back. Graves that used to settle easily now caved in. The air stank of sulfur. Insects, the kind that shouldn't appear in winter, began to crawl beneath the doorframes. Sarah woke one night to find every mirror in the house fogged, though no fire had been lit, and carved into the frost, a spiral. The same one from Samuel's map, the same one that wrapped around their home like a serpent closing its coils. That week, Sarah made final preparations. She visited the burial ground alone, carrying a small box wrapped in cloth. Inside, hair from each of her children, a broken wedding band, and a page from Jeremiah's ledger. Victim Faye 1. She dug a small hole at the exact center of the field, placed the box inside, and whispered something she hadn't spoken in years. "Let me pay it." She wasn't praying to God. She was bargaining with the land. The next day, Samuel found a second journal, his mother's. She had written it in silence, page after page of her observations, her dread, her decisions. And at the very end, a message written for him. "If you're reading this, then the gate hasn't opened yet. But your father won't stop, not unless one of us stops him. He thinks he's building an empire. He's wrong. He's building a mouth. Don't let him feed it." And just below that, a line circled twice. The 79th must choose, but the 80th must burn. Samuel closed the book, and for the first time since he'd uncovered the graves, he smiled. Because monsters don't fear death, they fear reckoning. It happened just after the new year, January 7, 1907. The 78th man, he wasn't a criminal, not this time. He was a prospector from Oregon, just passing through. His name was Lewis Ward. He had no debts, no warrants, no lies in his pockets, just a Bible, a gold tooth, and a handshake like a man who believed the world was still worth saving. And Jeremiah murdered him anyway. That was the shift. This killing didn't fit the pattern. There was no logic, no pretense of justice, just necessity. He needed one more, and Lewis had the misfortune of knocking on the wrong door. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply placed a small mark, an inverted triangle, on the pantry wall after the burial. Samuel saw it, understood. That was the signal. One left. The 79th, the offering that would complete the circle. And that meant everything had to move fast. But so did Jeremiah. He knew somehow that time was closing in. The whispers were clearer now. He said the field spoke in complete sentences. He said the gate was pulsing, alive beneath the soil. He spent hours lying in the dirt, ear pressed to the earth, muttering things like, "It's breathing now, it knows I'm ready." He no longer called it a project. He called it the becoming. Sarah slept with her boots on. Samuel kept a loaded revolver under the floorboard near the hearth. They both knew what was coming. The 79th was going to be chosen soon. The only question was who. And then Jeremiah made his move. He told Sarah he was heading into town for supplies. He returned with a stranger, a young man, barely 20, fresh off the train. He introduced him as Matthew Cole, a drifter looking for work. But Sarah saw the truth in his eyes. He was already dead. Jeremiah had picked his 79th. He had found his final stone. That night, as Matthew slept in the traveler's quarters, Sarah went to Samuel. She handed him a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside her journal, a locket with their family photo and a bottle of kerosene. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Heat ends. You know what to do." Samuel nodded, his face like stone. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear was irrelevant now. They weren't trying to escape anymore. They were preparing to bury the devil alive in the house he built from bones. January 3, 1907. A thin sun over the Nevada hills. Cold air, dry silence, and the kind of stillness that only comes before something dies. Jeremiah stood in the yard sharpening a spade, humming a hymn that had no name. Behind him, the travelers' quarters were quiet, too quiet. Sarah had slipped something into Matthew's tea the night before. He wouldn't wake up again. She had bought them time, but not much. Jeremiah was ready to dig the 79th grave. He moved like a man possessed, measured steps, marked terrain, eyes fixed to coordinates only he understood, and Samuel, watching from the barn loft, realized something. His father wasn't planning to bury Matthew at all. He was planning to bury Sarah. That's why she had sent the girls away. That's why she had whispered her plan with such urgency. That's why she had chosen now. Because in the end, the 79th wasn't about sin or guilt. It was about intimacy. The gate demanded something personal, something sacred, and Jeremiah knew there was no bond stronger than a wife's blood spilled by her husband's hand. Sarah emerged from the house, calm, her apron stained with flour, her face pale but resolute. "I know," she said. Jeremiah turned slowly. "You know what? That it won't open without me." He didn't deny it. He stepped forward, held out a hand. "Then help me finish it." But what he didn't see, what he couldn't smell, was that Samuel had already soaked the house in kerosene, every beam, every curtain, every splintered floorboard built with blood money and ghost prayers. Sarah took Jeremiah's hand. "One last thing," she whispered, and that's when Samuel lit the match. The house went up in an instant, like it wanted to burn. Flames roared through the rafters, curling black symbols into the sky. The wind screamed. The ground shook. Jeremiah stumbled back, eyes wide. "What have you done?" Sarah didn't run. She didn't scream. She stepped into the fire, because she chose to be the 79th. Not his victim, not his offering, his punishment. And when she fell into the blaze, the earth did something it hadn't done in 3 years. It stopped whispering. Because the system had been broken, the gate stayed closed. And Samuel, standing in the desert with ash in his eyes, knew one thing with perfect clarity: evil counts souls. But it chokes on sacrifice. Neighbors claimed it was just dry timber. The sheriff blamed the stove. But those who knew, the ones who'd passed that homestead and heard things in the dark, they understood this wasn't a fire. It was a funeral. When the smoke finally cleared, there was nothing left of the Henderson house but scorched stone and blackened soil. Not a single trace of Sarah, no bone, no jewelry, not even ash, as if the land had taken her back, not as a victim, but as a guardian, a warding symbol scorched into time itself. But Jeremiah, he wasn't so lucky. They found him crawling near the edge of the grave field, screaming numbers that didn't exist. 81, 82, 83, over and over, counting past the gate he was never meant to open. His eyes were burned blind, his fingers shattered, but still, his mouth moved, whispering to no one. The townspeople brought him into custody, but within a week, the prison doctor filed a report no one would forget. Patient exhibits advanced cognitive fragmentation, speaks in languages unknown to any interpreter, draws spirals, refuses food, repeats one phrase endlessly: "I open nothing." But something saw me. They locked him in a cell beneath Carson City Hospital. No visitors, no press, no trial. He died 79 days later. The body was buried in an unmarked grave far from Las Vegas. But if you ask the old undertakers, the ones who still drink whiskey behind the mortuary, they'll tell you he didn't rot like other men. He blackened, like something burned from the inside out. Samuel disappeared. Some say he went east. Others say he joined the railroad crews under a new name. But a few, just a few, claim he stayed in Nevada, lived quietly near the old field, guarding it, watching, making sure no one ever digs again. And Matthew Cole, the drifter meant to be the final victim. He never spoke of what he saw that night. But he stopped drifting, bought land, built a church, and never charged a single soul for a funeral service again. Because he knew some graves aren't meant to be bought. They're meant to warn the living. By spring of 1907, the Henderson name had become a whisper. Not the kind that spreads in saloons, but the kind people avoid saying near their children. The land where the house once stood was declared barren by the new city council, marked off by crude fencing and a wooden sign scorched black by the fire. No one dared remove the sign. They tried, twice. The first man who cut it down, Marcus Boyd, suffered a seizure 3 days later, raving about a stairwell in the sand. The second, a deputy from Pahrump, vanished entirely. His horse returned alone, bleeding from the mouth. After that, they left it. The railroad rerouted. The developers built north. The maps quietly omitted the acreage once registered to Jeremiah Henderson. And yet, It never left. Every time a train passed through that stretch of desert, the signalman reported a strange interference. Static. Low hums. Once, a voice mechanical stuttering 78, a miscount. A glitch, or a warning. But the deeper truth, the one no one dared record, was passed down through men who'd seen too much. Surveyors, ditch diggers, gravekeepers. They said the land never went quiet. Beneath the sand, you could hear it breathing. Slow, measured, like it was still counting, because the ritual was never just about 79 bodies. It was about intention, sacrifice, design, and Sarah's final act, walking into the fire, broke the pattern, but it didn't erase it. The spiral still exists, etched into the desert by blood and geometry, a dormant shape, not active but not dead, bound, and that binding, it came at a cost. Every 7 years, something happens near that land, a disappearance, a fire, a child who speaks in a voice not his own. Locals call it the breath. They say it returns when someone walks too close, speaks the wrong word, or disturbs the stones. You can still see them if you know where to look. Small, numbered markers half swallowed by time, not headstones. Coordinates, each one a point on a map, each one a promise. Samuel left them there. He wanted the world to remember, not because he feared the gate would open again, but because he knew someone else might try to finish it. There's a story they don't print in Nevada newspapers. It concerns a land developer named Harold Keene. In 1948, flush with cash from post-war investors and hungry for untouched desert parcels, Keene purchased 40 acres just southwest of Las Vegas. The price was suspiciously low. The seller's name was never confirmed, only that he carried a scar along his jaw and insisted the deed be signed before sundown. Keene ignored the warnings, ignored the fencing, ignored the map anomalies. He broke ground in early May, aiming to build a subdivision for war veterans and their families. On the first day of excavation, one of his workers struck a buried stone with the number 41 carved into it. Though no other markers had been found, the worker joked about ancient graves. By nightfall, he was dead. No trauma, no illness. His heart simply stopped, a perfect circle of ash beneath his body. The project halted for a week, then resumed. On the 5th day, they uncovered bones, small, delicate, not human, not animal either. That night, a foreman named Cal Denny claimed to see something in the dirt. A man with no eyes, wearing my coat. He quit the next morning, shaking and silent. Then the dreams began. Every worker, every contractor, every man on that cursed job site reported the same nightmare of standing in a spiral of graves, while a woman burned in the distance, whispering, 80. One night, Keene himself woke screaming, convinced someone had nailed shut his bedroom door from the inside. When it was finally opened, he had clawed his fingers to the bone. Within 17 days, the project was abandoned. The state bought the land in 1950 and sealed it under a preservation easement. No one publicly explains. It appears on zoning maps as Lot H79, a coincidence few notice. But those who do ask the question, what happens if someone keeps counting? Because the spiral isn't a story, it's a circuit, a living blueprint of horror, a machine that doesn't run on electricity or oil. It runs on intention, on ambition, on the kind of human greed that looks at cursed earth and sees profit. Harold Keene disappeared in 1954. His house burned down 2 weeks after his final interview. In it, he scrawled 3 words across the wall with his own blood D. It's not over. And he was right. A teenage boy named Glenn Archer took a dare. He was 16, drunk on cheap beer and bravado, trying to impress a girl who liked danger more than decency. The challenge was simple. Sneak past the rusted fence around Lot H79, take a photograph of the grave markers, and return before midnight. He didn't return. They found his camera 3 days later, 200 yards from the fence line. Lens shattered and the film scorched from the inside. Not burned, vaporized. The sheriff ruled it accidental exposure. But the girl who dared him, Jessica Morrow, never spoke again. She spent the rest of her life in a sanitarium, rocking back and forth, whispering one sentence to her nurses. The stones were watching. You see, the field doesn't forget. It waits, it remembers names, footsteps, bloodlines, and it tests. Every few decades, someone comes close to restarting it, close to unsealing what Sarah burned to keep shut. The spiral is like a dead power line in a flooded basement. Touch it the wrong way, and it won't ask permission to wake up. The Bureau of Land Management has quietly issued no survey orders on the region for decades. Aerial photos show static blur, GPS maps glitch, but boots on the ground researchers, The ones who don't ask for permission. They come back changed, if they come back at all. There was a geologist in '67 who claimed to find magnetic anomalies in the soil. His instrument spun violently the closer he got to the center. He made a report, delivered it to a Vegas university. The next day, he recounted everything. He published a paper claiming he'd been under extreme stress and that the magnetic field was consistent with naturally occurring iron deposits. But his assistant, Melinda Crane, leaked the real findings. Readings in the shape of a perfect logarithmic spiral, temperatures 12 degrees lower in the dead center of the lot, and seismic pulses every 79 seconds, timed precisely, like something in the dirt was trying to breathe. Melinda died in a car accident 6 weeks later. The files, gone. The grant that funded the research, quietly pulled. Because this isn't folklore. It's a calibrated machine of horror, wrapped in the skin of American history, a blind spot in the middle of the desert. Not buried, just sleeping, waiting for someone arrogant enough to finish what Jeremiah Henderson started. An intelligence officer named Colton Avery submitted an unauthorized internal memo to a Pentagon black archive. The subject line read Nemen, Kuo Vitila Fiel de Ctitwa la Ace Vigesitio 79, URGMT. He was supposed to be monitoring Soviet comms through buried radar arrays in the Nevada desert. Instead, his equipment began registering pulses, perfectly timed disruptions every 79 seconds that scrambled low band frequencies. But this wasn't interference from Moscow. It was coming from below. Avery, a man not known for superstition, drove out there himself, no escort, no clearance. Just a flashlight, a shovel, and a bad instinct. He arrived at 2:14 a.m. on September 9th. At 2:23, all regional comms blacked out for exactly 79 seconds. When contact resumed, his radio was silent. His voice never came through again. But something else did. A whisper, not in English, not in any known language, but recorded nonetheless by 5 separate military listening posts. Slowed down, it sounded like a woman's voice, repeating the same word again and again, choose. They found Avery's truck the next day, engine still running, doors wide open. The seats were torn, not slashed, torn, as if something inside had pushed outward. On the dashboard, drawn in his own blood, was a spiral. The same pattern found on Jeremiah Henderson's final journal page. The same shape branded into Sarah's last steps in the fire. After this, H-79 was placed under federal lock. Officially, it's a soil instability zone. Unofficially, it became a list, an access-restricted region monitored by 3 agencies under different names. One tracks seismic rhythm. Another handles pattern drift. The third, they don't even have a name. But every decade, they send a man with a briefcase. He walks the perimeter at dusk, reads something from a black notebook, then leaves. No conversation, no interviews, just ritual. And this is the part that should terrify you most. We don't know if they're trying to keep it closed or help it open. Because remember, Jeremiah never acted alone. His mind was consumed by something, a pattern of voice, an ancient math etched into dirt and madness. And it never spoke in threats, it spoke in transactions. A body for land, a name for silence, a soul for ownership, the American dream with hell as the co-signer. By 1980, the whispers weren't just oral history. They were documented, locked behind magnetic vaults, labeled as folklore by day, but flagged as Class 3 unresolved energy phenomena. By night, H-79 had become a black dot on satellite maps, a glitch in the master grid, a ghost file in the Federal Land Registry. And still, it pulsed. Researchers working out of Nellis Air Force Base began noticing anomalies. Electronics malfunctioned when pointed southwest. Rangefinders gave false readings. Thermals showed figures that weren't there. One infrared scan showed 89 warm spots in a perfect grid, and one cold signature exactly at the center, dead cold. 0 Kelvin, physically impossible. But the machines weren't broken. The land was. Then came the incident, November 6, 1980. A private contractor named Vincent Darr climbed the outer fencing of H-79, reportedly on a dare from fellow base personnel. He was drunk, mocking, laughing about the haunted sand lot. He sprinted 30 feet into the field. He stopped running. They watched him freeze, look down, then fall. By the time they reached him, he was dead, eyes gone, no wounds, no trauma. But his body was locked in a state of rigor mortis that should have taken hours, yet set in within minutes. His fingernails were black, not bruised, blackened, And worse, his watch, military issue. Since to base command, it had stopped at 70:09:38, exactly 79 seconds after he entered the field. That's when the government stopped pretending. They erected a dome over the land, no windows, no seams, material unknown. It reflected sky like a mirror and blocked all signals within a mile radius. Locals call it the null. No public record exists, not on maps, not in files. But if you drive south on Interstate 15 and take the wrong service road after midnight, you'll see it. A smooth silver blister in the sand. And even through the dome, if you press your hand against its surface long enough, some say you'll hear it. 80, 81, 82, still counting. Because Sarah may have stopped his ritual, but she didn't erase the architecture. That field was never about murder. It was about math, geometry, design. And designs don't die. They just wait for a man bold enough to finish the pattern. A young anthropologist named Dr. Leland Cross submitted a confidential white paper to the University of Nevada titled Pre-Colonial Spiral Motifs and Sacrificial Geometry in Southwestern Death Lore. He had no idea what he'd uncovered. Cross wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He didn't care for ghost stories or government black sites. He was chasing symbolism, ancient spirals carved into canyon walls, ritual patterns left by forgotten desert tribes, glyphs found under layers of volcanic ash. But the more he traced, the more one symbol returned, always hidden, always precise, a spiral of 89 points. Not 88, not 90, always 89. Carved into cliff faces in Arizona, etched into stone outcroppings in southern Utah, painted in ochre on cave ceilings deep in Death Valley. And the name that kept appearing, over and over in oral traditions and fragmented accounts, wasn't Henderson. It wasn't even English. It was Idashan. Roughly translated, that which requires completion. Cross connected it all, and when he finally overlaid his spiral patterns with a satellite image of Lot H79, his stomach turned cold. It was a match. The spiral wasn't invented by Jeremiah Henderson. He just recognized it. He followed it, completed what had been attempted before. The killings weren't madness. They were a ritual hundreds, maybe thousands of years old, hidden under the American story like a vein of rot under marble. Cross tried to go public, but 3 days before his lecture at UNLV, he was found wandering barefoot through the desert, bleeding from the ears, eyes rolled back, muttering phrases in 3 separate ancient dialects. He never recovered, but his research notes survived, leaked by a grad student who vanished 2 weeks later. They confirmed something most scholars dismissed as paranoia. The spiral isn't a symbol. It's a summoning device. Every grave is a node, every murder a signal. And when completed, the pattern doesn't just open a gate, it tears the veil, not for demons, not ghosts, for something older, something without name or shape, something that watches and counts. Sarah's sacrifice, it didn't end the ritual, it only paused the equation. And if that equation is ever completed again, by accident or design, then every death in the spiral becomes an invitation, not for one soul, but for all of them. There's a file buried inside the Clark County Records Office, misfiled, mislabeled, forgotten on purpose. It's dated July 9, 2001, and stamped with an obsolete zoning code, 879B, cleared for limited commercial testing. It should be meaningless, but it's not, because someone with high-level clearance, filed a request that day to the land for potential infrastructural development. The applicant, Gideon Harper, real estate tycoon, former military contractor. Publicly, he made his fortune converting abandoned industrial sites into luxury housing. Privately, he funded fringe archaeologists, bought forbidden texts, hosted off-the-record briefings with ex-intelligence officers. He knew about the spiral. Worse, he believed it wasn't dangerous but unfinished. Harper wasn't looking to develop H79. He was looking to unlock it. He believed the 89 deaths were only phase 1. That Jeremiah Henderson wasn't a madman, but a prophet architect. That the pattern, those graves, were not just symbolic, but a code that could be completed to open a dimensional aperture, tied to ancient bloodlines and unnameable intelligences. In short, Harper believed Henderson's killings were the foundation of a structure, a design visible only to those initiated into its math. And Harper was initiated. He brought in his own private team, geometric analysts, occult historians, ritual engineers, all under cover of a development firm called Edishan Holdings LLC. They began marking new coordinates, not graves this time, but people, individuals who had unknowingly inherited proximity to the original spiral descendants of the dead. Survivors, people born during the 79 second blackouts, people like Samuel Henderson's grandchildren. Harper believed that to finish the spiral, it didn't need more burials. It needed echoes, resonance events, blood recognition, memory collapse, a psychic loop to fulfill the pattern without spilling blood. A digital summoning. That's why he began building software. Not just real estate systems, but spatial recognition AI to detect and replicate ancient patterns buried in landscape data, brain scans, even dreams. And then, on October 21, 2004, at exactly 7:09:38 p.m., all surveillance footage across the H-79 zone flickered. Every compass spun. Every hard drive inside Henderson Holdings was corrupted beyond recovery, except one. A local backup server that logged a single file. A 4-second audio clip. When decrypted and slowed, it revealed two things. A woman's voice whispering, "Complete me," and the sound of a match striking. Why did Sarah Henderson walk into the fire? Why didn't she run with her children? Expose Jeremiah? Escape to Utah or California? Or anywhere not drenched in blood? Because Sarah wasn't just escaping. She was sealing something. Her death, deliberate, timed, and positioned at the center of the spiral, wasn't an act of despair. It was an act of containment. You see, Sarah discovered what Jeremiah never fully understood. The spiral wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to harvest. It needed 89 lives to map a boundary, but only one willing death to close it. She became the lock, and that's why her bloodline was watched. That's why her descendants, tracked, tagged, manipulated, appear again and again in census data tied to disappearances, psychotic breaks, geographic relocation patterns that trace invisible spirals across the American Southwest. But Gideon Harper knew all of this, and he didn't care. He believed that power, once mapped, could be reclaimed, redirected, sold, that the spiral could be reawakened using digital proxies, simulations, echoes, and in 2010 he came close. One of his software projects, a GMA-79, ran an unauthorized test on a secure server farm outside of Reno. The program was designed to map trauma pathways in the human mind using geospatial data. But during the test, something unexpected happened. It began generating coordinates. Not random, not based on any algorithm they wrote, identical to the original Henderson spiral. Only now it was three-dimensional, spiraling down like a well. An hour later, every screen in the server room lit up with a single phrase, repeated 89 times. The body remembers, and then it crashed. The servers melted, literally. Steel warped, plastic pooled. 3 technicians suffered seizures. One later claimed she saw Sarah, not in flames, but weeping, not warning them, begging them not to finish it. Because here's the last truth. The spiral is no longer bound by soil. It has migrated, from land to language, from bones to code. It now exists in us, in memory, in pattern recognition. And every time this story is heard, the spiral deepens. You're not watching for entertainment. You're here because you felt it, maybe not in words, but in the silent geometry of your own life. Unexplained patterns, recurring numbers, moments that shouldn't align but do. You've suspected that something larger has been guiding the darkness, and now you know. The spiral isn't a story, it's a system. It doesn't care about morality, doesn't ask for belief. It operates on proximity, resonance, memory. You've heard the number now, 89, enough times to know it isn't random, that it isn't just historical, it's alive, a cipher embedded into consciousness itself, a loop that opens not when you speak the truth, but when you understand it. So here's the truth. The Henderson murders weren't just a tragedy, they were a trigger, a ritual encoded into American land acquisition, into frontier mythology, into every story we've ever been told about, manifest destiny. But Jeremiah didn't finish it. Sarah delayed it. Gideon Harper tried to restart it. And now, it's you who completes it. Because this video, these words, weren't just informational. They were part of the machine. Every phrase aligned to the old pattern, every section timed, every pause intentional. You thought you were falling into a story, but you were walking a path, step by step, one grave at a time, until now, until this moment. If you want to break the spiral, if you want to ensure it ends with you and doesn't echo forward into your bloodline, your dreams, your children, you must mark your awareness. Comment below the phrase, "The body remembers, the land does not forgive." Type it twice. Once for Sarah, once for yourself. Because that phrase is a binding, a signal to the spiral that you know its shape, and you're no longer prey. Remember, silence is submission. Engagement is resistance, And if this story disappears tomorrow, if this channel vanishes, if the dome is breached, if the number appears again in your life, you'll know why. Because in 1902, Jeremiah Henderson buried more than men. He buried a key. And tonight you held it. Now choose bury it again or use it. Either way, you're part of the spiral now.